Once again, thank you everyone for joining. My name is Denise. I am a Zoogler. I was laid off in January. Like I just said, we helped put this webinar together because there were a lot of questions. I had a lot of questions, and my good friend Jess, who is here with Charles Schwab, has been helping me out with this process. We did this a little bit before, I guess it was last month. It seems like it's a big blur. For my team that was laid off, because we were all supporting each other and they also had questions. So we thought we'd do it again and perhaps even do a series of these. And Jess has looped in his amazing colleagues and our partners at Summitry. And so I wanted to introduce this to you guys. It's been a great help to me. And I know my my teammates really enjoyed it. So without further ado, I'm going to get out of the way and I want to kick this over to, I believe, Jess.
All right, great. Thank you, Denise. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Jess Ramos, and I'm a financial consultant with Charles Schwab. When Denise had asked me to help her coworkers who were affected by the layoff, I was very sympathetic to the situation. I'd previously worked in tech companies in the Valley, and I too was laid off when the dot-com bubble burst in the early 2000s. I don't know how many of you remember Sun Microsystems, but that was the tech company that I last worked for. So I've been in your situation before, left wondering what to do with my 401k. What about the stock I was granted? What about a job? What about healthcare? My daughter at the time was just 6 months old. Now, fast forward a couple decades, my daughter's in college, and I've had the privilege of working the last 20 years as a financial advisor, helping primarily other tech workers with meeting their financial goals. So life does have a way of working itself out after a transition like this. And there are people out there, such as myself and my colleagues at Summitry, to help you with this transition. As a Schwab financial consultant, I am my client's financial doctor. So I'm the first person that they come to when they have questions about, how they can achieve their financial goals, such as building a nest egg that will allow them to retire, or saving for their kids' education, or bridging the income gap between jobs. So when needed, I bring in specialists such as my partners from Summitry, who are here today to talk about job transition planning. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my counterpart at Summitry, Alex Katz, to introduce our panelists. Alex?
Thanks, Jess. Appreciate it. And big thank you to Denise for bringing us all together. We loved doing the first one last month, got a great engagement from the folks on the call, and we're delighted to do round two. So thanks to everyone for joining us, and Denise, thanks for getting us all together. And big thank you to Jess as well. We do a number of events with Jess specifically and with Charles Schwab more broadly, and always love speaking to mutual clients. So so appreciate the time together today. I really love Jess's kind of general practitioner and specialist analogy. I'll do a brief introduction to Summitry. I'm sure all of you know who Charles Schwab is, and probably very few of you know who Summitry is. So I'll share a little bit more about who we are as the specialists in this analogy. Before we get to all of that, and just spoke to this a little bit, but I do want to just acknowledge the reason why we're all together today, and that is that everyone on this call has gone through a major disruption to life in the form of a layoff. Our firm has had the privilege and honor to help many clients through layoff situations over the years, and regardless of your personal financial situation, layoffs are always disorienting in some form or fashion. So you may be on this call saying, hey, I got to figure out what's next for me. What's the next job? How do I kind of keep the bridge solutions in place between here and there? Or you may be in the position on this call of saying, hey, can I consider retirement? Might this be the moment where this is a gift? And I say, okay, can I sail off into the sunset, whatever that means for you? And there's, of course, everything in between on that spectrum. But a very personalized conversation, and we always look forward to the opportunity to help people when they're in those moments of disorientation. About today, so we do a lot of events like this one, and we always have two guiding principles for our events. Number one is make this educational. So we're not here to do a sales pitch. And number two is do our best to try to not put you to sleep. So at some point today, you'll check in with us, and hopefully you're all still awake and you can confirm that we accomplished at least number two. I'm very confident we're going to accomplish number one. So the caveat that I would say to the educational piece, the first guideline, is that we know everyone on this call has one thing in common in that the layoffs have happened. But beyond that, your financial lives, your specific concerns, your ambitions for the future, those are all likely quite different. So the education is going to have to be relatively general. But again, feel free to submit questions through the Q&A icon at the bottom. And know that the opportunity to really get specific with us really happens in the follow-up conversations after this call. I'll say it now, I'll say it again at the end. If you have an interest in having an individual conversation, the first step is to reach out to Jess. We'll provide his contact information. Just like in medicine, you go see your general practitioner first. They diagnose the situation. If a specialist needs to be brought in, then they do that. So Jess is the next step coming out of this meeting for those who want to dig a little bit deeper. Let's go to the next slide, and I'm going to introduce the team of presenters from Summitry, and then I'll do a very quick intro to our firm. The star of today's show is Brandy Savage, and Brandy, he's one of the principals here at Summitry. He has had a unique path to the financial services industry. As we like to say, he is a recovering attorney who found that the work that we do with our clients is a lot more rewarding than the work that he was doing in the courthouse. So you'll be hearing a lot from Brandy today. And then we also have Mandy Pham joining us. She's one of our senior financial advisors. She's a member of our financial planning committee. She's got more letters after her name than any other advisor I know. And really importantly, the meaning behind those letters: as a certified financial planner, many of you may be familiar with that designation, but this is about creating the roadmap for people's future, in particular when they are in a moment of disorientation, disruption, like many on this call find themselves today. Certainly very capable of answering the questions, for the example I gave, hey, maybe this is the moment where I sail off into the sunset. That's clearly a question that needs to be heavily scrutinized by somebody with a CFP designation. Mandy's also a chartered financial analyst, so she has deep portfolio management expertise, and she's also an enrolled agent, so she has deep tax planning expertise. So it is the perfect trifecta. Mandy will primarily be joining us for Q&A at the end, so bring your nuanced questions and tap into Mandy's brain. Let's go to the next slide. So we'll do a very quick intro to Summitry. And I'm going to start with our mission statement, because that's really, it speaks to Jess's point about specialists. And so when we talk about what we do as a firm, we don't get into the specifics of our portfolio strategies and the nuances of our financial planning. Of course, we can talk about that. Really, what we want people to take away is that we help families thrive through the unique set of opportunities and challenges posed by life in the Bay Area. In many cases, it's opportunities. We're here today to talk about something that is both a challenge and hopefully for many of you also an opportunity. But really what I would want you to understand about Summitry is that we are a wealth management firm that is focused on the unique set of concerns that come with life where we all call home. And that could be having concentrated positions tied to your GSU income, that could be the inordinately expensive cost of real estate in the Bay Area. There are a number of Bay Area specific financial concerns, and that's really our sweet spot and where we focus. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Brandy Savage to take us through our agenda for today and get into the meat. So with that, off to you, Brandy.
Good afternoon, everyone. So we can go ahead and move on to the next slide of the agenda. And this is really where we get into the meat of it. So we've outlined a couple of things, and we tried to customize and tailor this a little bit more specifically. So you'll see the first thing we'd like to tackle a couple of common questions, the financial planning, a checklist of considerations that you have been maybe considering already or just wanted to get more in depth on. We wanted to also touch on a bit more on the 401k accounts, questions that often arise in situations like these, like when a 401k becomes inactive. And then we'll also touch on GSUs, considerations for concentrated stock positions, things of that nature, as well as some severance package and termination considerations. From there, I'd like to circle into a couple of just case studies that we've had. I think that helps bring to life some sampling of, you know, when there's those real life problems that come up, how do we tackle those types of problems? How do we address it and pull out those concerns and then find some kind of a solution for that that's best tailored to that specific situation. From there, the stress point that you'll see this common theme throughout today is where to go from here, and that's taking and maintaining control. And I think everything that everyone is doing, even just by being a part of this conversation today, I think is incredibly helpful for that. So, you know, giving a bit more context, and we can move into slide number 5, some of those common questions. I want to touch on a couple of things and add a bit more context to what Alex has already mentioned, just that we've had the pleasure of a couple of different topics alongside our partners at Schwab that we've been able to present on. And as we jump into these common questions, I think it's really helpful to provide a bit more of a backdrop on your sector. So I'll say that the timing of this event could not be more appropriate. So in terms of tech, and we're seeing this kind of increase of layoffs that has been picking up since last year, specific to Google, and many of you may be relatively familiar already, but if we were looking at the total employees at Google in 2019, that was about 119,000. In 2021, that was 150,000. It peaked last year at about 187,000 in 2022. So if there's about a 12,000 employee layoff, that's effectively a 6% reduction of the entire workforce. Still, that said, it's still much higher than, say, those pre-2019 or 2021 numbers. But I thought it was helpful to provide some context as far as what exactly is going on, not just at Google, but in the tech industry. We know that there was a lot of hiring that took place during the pandemic. And I would say that within the tech sector, in comparing last year and this year, last year, the tech sector shed about 150,000 jobs in all of 2022. So we're entering right now the second week, we're on March 8th, the second week of March. And if we were to include the announcement from Meta yesterday, this year's layoffs is close to 100,000. So it's not to say that we're on track to seeing, say, 500,000 to 600,000 layoffs this year, but it's worth noting that what your sector is doing at this stage. And this is something that a lot of us at Summitry were trying to kind of jump in front of since last summer as well. But I think it's helpful just to provide a bit more context as far as what exactly has been going on in the tech sector, and then honing in specifically more to Google. So as Alex mentioned, we'll do a bit more of an extensive session on the Q&A where Mandy will join us a lot more for that one as well. But I wanted to make sure that we look not just at the layoffs, but also Google in particular, and flesh those out during our Q&A session. So that being said, I think there's some of those considerations that we've outlined here, such as what happens to my 401k, how much do I need to retire, how much time do I have before I might deplete my emergency fund, what happens to my GSUs, what kind of tax considerations are there, and are there other questions surrounding termination and severance package. So all of those are very, very valid questions that may be top of mind for you, but I thought it was helpful just to kind of visualize that here. So in terms of the steps that we take, I think it's helpful to give a better understanding of what we can do, because it can be very crucial from this point and going forward to taking action and taking charge of not just your life, but your finances. And as Alex mentioned, it can be in some ways an opportunity for each of you as you consider what direction you want to go in both your life and your career. So for some of you, again, that might be a new job opportunity. That timeline may vary. I'll give a very brief example of something I saw firsthand with one of my friends who worked at Twitter. It was a little bit more of a chaotic situation on that side. But when he was laid off at Twitter, he made a decision to get back into the workforce, but he is aiming to do so with a 3 to 6 month sabbatical and then kind of ease himself back in. And I think credit to him in terms of everything that he did as far as taking charge of his finances was going through those numbers, going through his expenses and updating all of the financial information and accounts on his side, consolidating accounts where he could and simplifying to create less of a headache. And because of all those things that he's maintained, it helped give him a better sense of his family's financial planning, emergency fund, and determining what those type of monthly or annual expenses are. So moving on to the next slide, it's really just a backdrop that I think, again, we'll consistently see, which is to always start with planning. Now, every situation is different, and it will always be that financial plan that's going to then underpin the recommendations and the path going forward. So that's your first preliminary step. And whether that be to get back in the workforce, whether and when to retire, enabling you to create like a realistic budget for you and your family and staying consistent with that budget. All of those types of things will help to drive out what's top of mind for you. It'll also help you to determine what your goals and your ambitions are, both on a short-term and a long-term basis. And then once you have those established, then from there you can create a cohesive strategy and line that up with the best recommendations. The taking action that I mentioned here, I just wanted to stress that one of those things that can happen is that feeling of paralysis by analysis or feeling paralyzed in some kind of a way. And I'd say one of the great things, again, just by everyone being here, clearly you're taking proactive steps to make sure that you can either take or maintain control in your personal and your financial life. Now, moving on to the next slide, I wanted to just highlight a couple of things which can be immediate action items. So that's the what issues should I consider if I lose my job. There's a nice checklist, which is very convenient to kind of run through, and we can provide this following the presentation and the webinar, just so you can have something on hand. You can run through that. Some of you may be at different phases of that checklist. That's okay. And I think we can help to provide a bit more context in a couple of these considerations, not just the cash flow issues, health insurance considerations, assets and debts, which all of you hopefully can run through on your side to make sure that everything is up to speed. Especially with the expenses, it's something very good to review on an ongoing basis, because those numbers may change from time to time. You know, if we were to say, take a number from December spending, from February spending to August spending, there's definitely going to be some variance. So you want to make sure that that is at least sufficient. It does not have to be down to the dollar, but at least it's a number that you can sort of hang your hat on when you're putting together your financial planning. Moving forward onto the next slide, I think this is really where we start getting into the meat of things and questions that might be specific to Google. So what we did is outlined the 4 options that are available to you when you're considering what to do with your old 401k. So when a 401k goes inactive, that's after some type of a separation between the employer and the employee. And so at that point, there's a couple of things that kind of kick into place. And this is very much a very, very high level conversation on 401ks, but at its core, there's really only 4 different things that would be considerations as far as what to do with your 401k. So the first one is you have an option to roll it into an IRA. You have an option to roll it into a new workplace 401k plan. You can keep it in your old workplace plan, or you can also cash it out. But with each of these considerations, there's a lot of things that you might be wanting to think about, such as the benefits and possible disadvantages based on each one. So for instance, rolling into an IRA, that's often popular where you can simplify and consolidate accounts where possible. When talking about your investment options in an IRA, traditionally a 401k, and it will vary from employer to employer, you might have sort of a small garden selection of options for investments. The IRA is sort of like going into an open prairie. So a lot of people do like that feature, but it's one that, you know, for instance, if you were to have a conversation with Jess, for instance, that would be one of those things to kind of talk through what it is you're trying to do and find out which one is most appropriate for you. I'd say that rolling into a new workplace plan is also an option where you can reconstitute it into an active 401k plan. I caution all the time that it's very plan specific, so you have to check with each employer just to make sure that that's an option on the table for you. The third option, which I mentioned, which is staying in your old workplace plan, again, very plan specific. So there are some companies out there who you might be able to stay in that old inactive 401k and keep your assets on that side for 5 years or 10 years or 20 years. And then there are other employers who might just say, okay, this is a former employee, we're going to scoot them out of it. And they might send you a notice with a couple of days or a couple of months of heads up so that you have to take a proactive action or they're going to roll it over for you. So just a consideration to have, which again is very employer specific. The last option, which is the cash out option, it is one of those things that's there, but in addition to paying taxes on, say, those tax deferred assets, it might have to be subject to a 10% penalty. Again, if you withdraw early and are not satisfying all the conditions for that early withdrawal. So all of those are types of situations that you might want to think about when you're tackling the question of what to do with your inactive 401k. From there, I strongly recommend that's a conversation, for instance, that you can have with Jess just to run through what it is you're trying to do, what your specific interests are, what your timeline is for retirement. And then together you can come through and find out what the best recommendation is from there. As far as the next slide, in terms of GSUs, this is something that we had some feedback on. We wanted to include a bit more context when talking about concentrated positions and GSUs. Undoubtedly, many of you hold a level of vested or soon to be vested stock in Google or Alphabet. And in determining what makes a concentrated position, that's really any position that exceeds 5%. So let's say you have $100,000 in assets, 5,000 of that is Google, that's a concentrated position. That's not to say that you should sell, but it begins the analysis on what might be most appropriate for you. So questions that may follow then can be, is this money for retirement? Is this sort of an icing on the cake or additional assets on hand that you may want to take a little bit more risk on? Would you like to retain at least some level of concentration? And when discussing concentration, it can be a very different conversation if it's, say, 5% of someone's portfolio for their entire assets versus 50% or 80% of their portfolio. And this probably doesn't surprise many of you, but we come across that situation a lot where there's this gradually increasing concentration the longer you work for the company that you do. So the questions that we've outlined here, such as what is a concentrated position? How does that impact my portfolio? What are my options? What are those tax considerations? Those are all those steps that we should be looking at when we look at the financial planning, which has to be very specific to you. So in so doing, some of those major considerations that we take into account when we're looking at diversification in a financial plan specifically, we want to look at, say, your liquidity needs, your capital gains or tax impact. Do you have any charitable aspirations or gifting strategies? And all those types of considerations can come into effect when determining what the best strategy is for you, and if you do diversify, to what level you do so. So once you've determined what the purpose of those assets are meant for, then we can take a look at the tools in the toolbox. So for us at Summitry, we typically strategize among a variety of about 7 different options for our clients. That could range from tax-sensitive strategy selling to exchange funds to qualified opportunity zone funds options overlay. Again, you don't have to write any of this down. I just want to give you some sense of what is out there. Charitable remainder trusts, donor advised funds. And the best part when looking at a specific tool is that we need to know what exactly it is that we're trying to address. And once that foundation's laid, then we can employ either one or multiple strategies to solve for whatever that situation is, and take a look at, whose those strategies are, what those strategies entail, and some very necessary considerations when determining if it is the right fit or that right tool to use. Now, going forward onto our next slide is a bit more on concentration. I thought this was a very helpful piece just to exemplify what market volatility can mean and what companies can face. And it can hit pretty hard for those who are holding concentrated positions, especially a year like last one. You're seeing a bit more volatility. This one as well has been seeing some volatility. And what we did here is pull kind of a sample of Bay Area companies just to show the degree to which volatility can take place, the speed at which it can do so, and the very different ways that it can play out. So obviously all of these three instances took place in a relatively short time span, and very significantly so. But the way that it can play out, as you see on the slide, is varied. And if we're looking at, for instance, the left-hand side for Pinterest, you see sort of this gradual, and I mean this relatively, but a gradual repeated downtick. And if we compare that on the right side with DocuSign, which had, for instance, one bad earnings call, then you see just a subsequent cliff drop. So one of the challenges that people often struggle with is the role that concentration plays out in their balance sheet. And so that's one of the very good questions that you can all ask yourselves as far as your GSUs. And we like to think that having a very sophisticated and tangible way of thinking about it is the most effective. So it's also not uncommon for us to ask a question: how does, say, an existing $4 million net worth mean for someone's family versus a swing for the fences up to 8 million versus having a substantial amount of volatility and coming back down to 2 million? And sometimes this helps determine whether or how much a client may wish to diversify out of a position. Now, moving on to our next slide. This is just on termination and severance package considerations. There's a lot of information in this section, so it's going to be very abridged. But a quick observation that I think is helpful about California, and I stress that we may well have attendees not currently in the US, that's okay, but specific to our area, and I think most of our attendees are in California. California tends to be very favorable. Additionally, employers of a certain size must give a level of notice pursuant to something called the WARN Act, WARN. Very likely why they structured a 60-day plus notice in advance of our March 31st deadline. All of these details are very good for overall, if you're in California, as it can help to shape the structure of the severance and the details following the layoff. So if you're kind of asking the question, why did they structure certain things the way that they did? It was likely being very mindful of it being in the good graces of California's labor employment laws. So some questions that you may have had include questions across the spectrum and typical questions such as wages, COBRA, unemployment, transition help, stock considerations, release of liability. In that email that Google had sent out, I believe on the 20th of January, I believe in most cases you're provided with 60 days of pay. That relates to the date of the notification. They had some additional considerations such as compensation. They stated that you'll receive a severance package starting at 16 weeks salary plus 2 weeks for every additional year at Google. They mentioned that your GSUs will be accelerated. They also mentioned a little bit more about the bonus structure and that everyone will be receiving their 2022 bonus. The paid time off section, which said that you're going to be paid for that. It's a very, very typical inclusion. And then there were a couple other features that they included there as well, such as healthcare. Bear in mind that you might be able to keep your job-based health plan through COBRA continuation coverage. They have a lot of resources in that email that they provided to you that ranged from support on job placement, additional resources for healthcare and questions that you can go to. They also had at the very end of that a mental health support section as well. the one takeaway that I would urge for everyone is please utilize your resources. There's a number of different things that they're offering out to you, which you're entitled to be pursuing while it's still available within this timeline. So very, very good resources for all of you, and encourage you to continue utilizing those the best you can. Now, moving on to our next case study, which is slide number 12. I just wanted to look at a couple of very quick instances of two instances where some clients had come to us with some challenges and how we tackled that. And I thought it was helpful just to give it a sense of an example so that you can see how something can play out. I think it can resonate a lot more when we see these types of examples play through. So this first case study I just wanted to share with everyone. It was a client that we worked with. They were laid off from Lamb Research. We had a fairly detailed plan already for them, covering executive and deferred compensation planning. We had some options planning, some retirement cash flow planning. We had some estate planning, obviously very important as well. And we worked with one of our partner firms, Watson and Machado, when we connected them to one of our CPA partners beyond that. So we had a lot of positive effects in terms of coordinating with various professionals. But in this instance, this client they were going to retire in 2024 anyway. This accelerated her retirement date. So we provided the family with pre-Medicare health insurance guidance. We shared a comprehensive checklist with them. And one interesting thing that came out was actually that she hadn't considered getting a HELOC through Schwab at one point. And based on the logistics, we were able to come up with a solution on that point there before she decided to permanently step away and kind of go off into the sunset in the way that she wanted to. So a lot of good things actually resulted from that, just through the planning aspect and learning more about what her situation was. So the update on that is we're getting together a little bit later this month to update her plan. As far as the numbers go on severance, health insurance subsidies, just tightening up all those pieces. She was very worried about her finances because she was in the process of going through her financial information, but this very much with her layoff spurred things along. And at least in a preliminary view, it created a lot of peace of mind. As it turns out, she's much better off than she initially expected. And we were able to create some additional safety nets, such as with the HELOC, so that she has it kind of like as an emergency option should she need. Now, moving on to the second case study, this was a client who was a plant manager in the tech industry. The stress level in this sense was a 10, maybe an 11, very, very high stress. And this gentleman came to us before resigning, not for any lack of love for the company or the work that he did or the people that he worked with, but it's because he didn't have enough time for his real priorities, which was his family and his 2 young children. So when he came to us feeling very discombobulated, there were a number of questions all across the spectrum. And that related very much back to the financial planning. So, questions that he had were, can I take a pay cut for a better work-life balance? How much less will still be okay? Can we stress test that plan? And what should he be doing as far as his highly volatile stock, which was causing him a lot of stress and probably losing a little bit of sleep at night. So in this case, he had zero financial planning done before we first met and didn't know exactly what those scenario build-outs would entail. So we provided a very comprehensive plan. We determined based on his spend and his typical expenses on a monthly and annual basis, along with his plans for funding 529 accounts for his 2 children, that he could actually take a 50% pay cut and still build a notable surplus over time. So all of the financial planning in this case meant that he happily decided to resign from his position, take a 6-month sabbatical, and then gradually come back into the workforce. So those are instances I think are very, very powerful because it's incredible to see those types of interactions and how going through this process can create a new path for someone and their family. Moving on to our next slide, I wanted to show a little bit more the section of what I call the financial planning and e-money analysis. I thought it would be very helpful to more visualize what exactly it looks like when building out a plan instead of just kind of me talking at everyone and we're kind of hypothesizing. So moving, and we could move to the next slide as our first sample piece. This is a sample of what a financial plan can look like. I want to stress that and make abundantly clear, the actual numbers that you see here is not what we're looking at, and that's not the relevant part, because every situation will vary as far as what those assets are and what the asset allocation is. But the reason that we wanted to provide this example is just to help to visualize a very helpful piece on how granular and detailed we can be and the extent to which the detail can be provided by way of that comprehensive financial planning. So these last slides are really just meant to provide a bit more context of what financial planning can entail when you get more detailed, because that again ties very closely into what the investments recommendations are, any tax strategies that we can employ. That's really what it kicks off the future conversations for. So with this slide, I think again, we just input all the data. You get a nice sense of what the asset allocations are. It's a very nice summary page to kind of to jump into, and then we can jump into some other pages here. The next slide, we can move forward one more, really speaks to creating hypotheticals. And I think this is incredibly helpful for getting a sense of, what is customizable within the plan. And that's the beautiful part about the eMoney sophisticated software that we like to use. You're going to see a long list of all of the things that we can do. That ranges from, what if growth rates change? What if inflation rates change over the long term? What if there's a disability? What if there's some retirement changes? They retire earlier than expected. All those types of variables can have a very substantive impact on the plan. So the nice thing about this, and that's what we see on the simulation on the right, is that Monte Carlo simulation, where it's utilizing all of those data points so that it can kind of determine kind of a likely outcome of success based upon what we've seen historically in the market and their chance of success from there. So the beautiful part about this, and we can even jump into the next slide as well, it's just a continuation of that sampling about if we activate those hypotheticals and you stress test the plan, is everything going to be okay? And I think this is really helpful because it also can help create that kind of peace of mind for those going through those in their head, but they want to see some sort of actual data driven to see what their likely outcome is. So that's really what the eMoney section is. I just thought it was helpful to provide a couple of things there. This one was looking at a what if scenario on like retirement changes if they retired out early. The next slide speaks to that directly as well, which is just showing what kind of a value loss there is if they do take an earlier retirement. In this case, of course, the good news is that everything is going to be completely fine, but it helps to visualize that to create the peace of mind, and at least then they can make a much more informed decision going forward. So that said, just one more piece on our last slide is our next steps and taking action. So as you've seen ad nauseum from me, is this recommendation to be proactive. So as you're tackling that next phase in your life, where one door closes, another one can open. I do want to note also as just a parting statement that you are among the highest tier of employees just by nature of the company with which you've worked. Statistically, just based on the employment applications alone, you stand a better chance of getting into Harvard than getting a position at Google. So you are all in that top tier. And I think part of that, and one of those common qualities for everyone here, is that you are proactive, that you take initiative, and that you take control in your life. So that's my positive parting takeaway that I want to urge for everyone is please take action, review and update your household income and expenses, go through all those financials, and don't be afraid to leverage your Schwab consultant. So Jess is very much on hand. He's very much a wonderful gatekeeper to know what resources he can leverage for you. And I think that would be those positive next steps. So with that, I think I'll turn it over for our Q&A. It looks like we have a couple of them here.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Brandy. Yeah, we've got some great questions and keep firing away as they pop to mind. So thanks for everyone who has submitted some. I'm going to answer the easiest one first, which is, will you be sharing slides and a recording afterwards? We will definitely be sharing slides. I believe we're going to share the recording as well. But yes, you will have the content from today's event to ruminate on and continue to digest. We got a question, actually 2 questions that were similar, and we'll start with these with Mandy. And they both have to do with negotiation of either negotiating for a severance package. One appears to be, or the other is negotiating the specifics of the severance package. And there are some examples in there, like, you know, the severance from Google is very generous, but I wonder if, is there an ability to negotiate on tenure rounding? Because in one case we might be a couple weeks or maybe a month shy of another full year, and that has implications on not only pay but also RSU vesting. And so it's a broad question with a lot of layers to it, but we'll start there, and Mandy, take it away.
Yes, I would like, first, we're not employment attorney, so this is not meant to be legal advice, and everyone's situation is very unique. But as Randy mentioned earlier, the term of the terminations that Google have for everyone is probably have been reviewed by at least 10 employment attorney, and it have met all of California requirement. So I would say, unless I see some of a couple of my clients, but they all VP level and above, actually did go to an employment attorney and negotiate some of the term in their specific terminations. But for a regular employee, I think it will be hard unless you have a unique situations. Again, everyone is unique, unless there is something that you not consider fair or something unique related to your working relationship with Google, then I would say talk to an employment attorney. But if there is none of that, it's really challenging to have to make a case for change of rule, especially big company like Google. They're very careful with making exceptions. So I'd say it's hard.
Thanks, Mandy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And Alex, just to tack onto that too,
Yeah,
I think it's helpful to know that this is probably not surprising to anybody, but labor and employment attorneys are very in high demand right now, just due to the number of layoffs. Mm-hmm. So I'd say that there may be a little bit more kind of cherry picking, so to speak. In other words, they select their cases a bit more with a bit more discerning eye. So just to be aware of that, that it might be a little challenging to get in contact with them. That being said, I think, and I extend this not just to labor employment, but also I know that there's questions for some employees or former employees regarding H-1B visas or anything immigration related. Mm-hmm. One wonderful resource in most counties in the US, and very specifically to the Bay Area, is that they will have a bar association. And if you reach out to them, whether that's the San Mateo County Bar Association, the Santa Clara County Bar Association, you can dial them up. It's usually, I think, like a flat rate of, say, $65. And in exchange for that, they will connect you with an attorney with the specialty that you're looking for, as well as ensuring that you typically get like a free 30-minute consultation to ask all of those legal questions that you may have. So it's a wonderful resource as well. I hope that's helpful.
That's great. See, always good to have a recovering attorney on the line, and always good to have one who's married to a labor and employment attorney too. So, so we get the double benefit of Brandy there. Thank you, Brandy, and thanks, Mandy. I think this next question is a really great one, because it speaks to, you know, people already sort of coming up with what's next for them and defining the next chapter in their life. So the question is, can you help with how we may want to set up our own business, meaning guidance on whether it should be an LLC or an S Corp or some other structure? Is that within the scope of the guidance that we can provide? Mandy, off to you again.
Yes, absolutely. And this is a conversation that I have with many of my clients quite often, whether this is just a side project that they want to pursue on top of their regular job. Or I did have one of my clients who pretty high up at Twitter, and she didn't sign the hardcore pledge at the end of last year and quit. And then we in conversation right now whether it makes sense to set up an LLC, regular LLC, or an S Corp that still flow through Uline LLC, or should she just doing it as a sole proprietor? There is several layers to it. There's the asset protection layer to it. There is how much you can contribute to a SEP IRA or an I-401k layer to it. There is how you file taxes, whether there is a requirement for a separate tax return. There's also the $800 filing fee with the state of California if you have an LLC. So it depends on how much revenue or consulting fee that you expect to make and what kind of deduction you hope to get, how much you want to contribute to a retirement account. Those are conversations that I have with my client to see whether it's worth it to set up certain structure or just do business as a sole proprietor. Now, after we decide that it makes sense for you to set up an LLC, we usually send you, refer you to an attorney to draft the LLC document, and that's just a one-time thing.
It's not going to be Brandy's wife. I'm just kidding. Might be Brandy's wife. I don't know. Okay, so next question is I'm gonna read it as it's written, and I think I'll try to do a little interpretation here. But as it's written is, do we have options for redistribution of GSUs within Schwab post vesting, and what costs are associated? My interpretation of that question, and whoever submitted it, feel free to correct me here, and you can just submit an update in the Q&A if you'd like. But my interpretation is once those GSUs are vested and now I just own Google shares outright, do they need to stay in what was my GSU account, or can those shares be ported over into any other, maybe you have an individual brokerage account at Schwab, or maybe you have a trust account at Schwab. The very short, quick answer is you own those shares outright. They can be held in any account in which you are the beneficial owner of that account. You could gift them as well if you wanted to, but moving shares from account to account generally comes with no cost whatsoever at Schwab. Jess, correct me there if I'm missing anything, but I don't think there's any sort of transactional fees associated with that.
Right. There is no cost in terms of just moving the shares over, and I'm happy to help you with that. It can be a little bit confusing sometimes moving those shares over because they are presented in a different part of schwab.com in your retail account, and also the information available may not be the same information that you see, but the important stuff, especially the tax cost basis information, is available. So when I help you move those over, I can orient you to where that info is and how you may want to liquidate some of those, because I don't think you want to just go in and wholesale start selling. I think you want to specify specific lots so that you could do some things like what a term we have in the industry, tax loss harvesting, to try to minimize your taxes. And that's something I can help you with a consultation. I think any of these questions, feel free to, I believe my contact info is on the last page of the deck there. Feel free to email me, or you can also call me or text me. And just as long as I can get your contact information, I can give you a call or email you back, and we can set aside 10 minutes just to talk through your questions and see if there's any further help that you need from specialists we have within Schwab or folks like Summitry.
Perfect. Actually, Anne, why don't we put that last slide back up with Jess's contact information while we hit on a couple other questions, and that way anyone who didn't get it the first time will see it again. The person who submitted that question confirmed that was what they were wondering, and then also asked if there were tax implications. Jess just spoke to one layer of the tax implications. Speaking directly to the question of, are there tax implications to move these shares from my GSU account to my brokerage account, the answer is no. There's only tax implications when those shares are actually sold. So that's to Jess's point, that's where we want to be very strategic in choosing the right lots. Of course, there's earned income tax on GSUs, but that's a different consideration of other than where the shares are held. We got a couple of questions on 401ks, and I think just broadly, it's kind of what needs to be done, what can be done, should I convert to IRA? So Mandy, maybe just a quick sort of primer on how to think about 401k issues.
Yeah, Brandy did have a slide earlier about it, but what needs to be done, there's a lot of things that can be done. You definitely have the option to roll it over to an IRA, and I see that as a good option to many clients, particularly if you've been to multiple different company and have 401k all over the place. I do believe that for Google, you have the option to just leave your 401k balance in the current plan, and that is a good option as well if you don't want to take any actions. Whether you want to make any, there might be a good opportunity to make a Roth conversion this year. If you choose to take the rest of the year off, then this might be one of the very few years that you are in a low tax bracket. So there's opportunity like that. If you do need to take a portion of your 401k out for living expenses, I would highly recommend we look at like all of the resources that you have before we go there, because there is implication, not just tax, but also the penalty that you might subject yourself to. But if your question is what needs to be done, you can leave everything as is as well. That's also one option.
Thanks, Mandy. Okay, last question that I see, and I'm going to kind of do a two-part answer to this, and then I'll turn it over to Jess. But the question is, what's the minimum net worth we need to work with you? So the answer for Summitry is two-part. The way we think about relationships with our clients is, first and foremost, we want to make sure that we are working with a significant percentage of your liquid net worth. So the example that I always give is, if you got 20 million bucks and you say, here's Summitry, here's $1 million, that's 5% of your net worth. We're not going to be able to have a particularly meaningful impact on your financial well-being managing only 5% of your net worth. So first and foremost, we really, for the clients that we work with, we are managing the lion's share of their wealth. So that's kind of the more important answer to the question. The secondary answer is, we do have a hard and fast minimum relationship size of $1 million. And that's not in net worth. That's $1 million in assets that we would actually be managing on behalf of the client. So that's where the Summitry answer to that question lies. And then Jess, why don't I turn it over to you just to speak to your practice specifically within Schwab?
Sure. I think when it comes to Schwab, we want to be able to help as many people as possible. So we don't have any minimums where you can come to us for a consultation. Happy to meet with you and go over your situation. And then from there, again, as your family financial doctor, I'm here to help you achieve your goals and establish a plan for you. Look at what solutions are available at Schwab. Summitry is one of them. We have many others within Schwab itself that are in-house that have lower minimums, and then make those together and help you to continue to work towards that goal and achieve those goals. I'll give you an example of how we're trying to make investing available to everybody, in that we have our Schwab Intelligent Portfolios, which is investing in index funds using our algorithm, and we don't charge a fee at all for that. So, and the minimum is essentially $5,000. So it can be available to nearly anyone that has a little bit of savings and needs some help, and we want to be able to help you. That being said, we have a very deep bench of experts and wealth strategists within Schwab, as well as our extended network, like the folks at Summitry, who can help with much more complicated situations. I've had my clients range from, retired folks to founders of startups to seed. I've got a larger family of the seed funded Zoom, and they had an explosive, 100x, wealth generation event, and we were able to help them and help them save on taxes. So we can get very granular in complicated situations, or we can help you with very simple situations and still get you the help you need.
Awesome. Thanks, Jess. We did just have one more come in, which is just, will you be working as a fiduciary? So I believe what the question is are we held to the fiduciary standard? We get that question a lot. That's one of those, hey, these are questions you should ask a wealth advisor before you consider hiring a wealth advisor. So it's an important question. And for those of you not familiar with the term, basically what that means is being held to the fiduciary standard means we must put our clients' interests before our own interests. And the answer to the question directly is yes. Summitry is as a registered investment advisor, we are held to the fiduciary standard. So always love that question because it's an easy one to answer. With that, I think the only other questions we got were just appreciation of the value of the conversation today. I'm going to thank Brandy for carrying the majority of the load today and being the star of the show. So Brandy, thank you very much. Mandy, thanks for all your guidance on Q&A. And one more time, Jess, always great to partner with you and the Schwab team. And Denise, if you're out there, thank you once again. So I'll just reiterate it. Next steps for anyone who's interested in going deeper and having more of a conversation, ping Jess Ramos and your general practitioner, your general financial practitioner, I guess, will direct you from there. So thanks to everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Okay, thanks everyone. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Thank you.